Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this Monday morning. I'm Dan Edelman, Vice President and UK General Manager of Global Merchant Services at American Express. We're delighted to welcome you to our very first Insights Forum live stream event, Business Unusual. As many of you know, we normally do these events in person and have done them around the West End of London at many different hotels and venues. And this is our first live stream event, so we're very glad to have everyone here. The pandemic is having a massive impact on business and employees across all industries. And here at American Express, innovation is at the heart of everything we do. And we're excited to share with you today how industry leaders are thinking about the future of not only work, but also leadership and collaboration. I'd really encourage you to ask questions throughout the session. There is a comments and question box at the bottom of the screen, so please submit your questions and comments, and the panel will answer them and make it as interactive as possible. But without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Charlotte Keesing, who is the COO of Walpole, and she's been working with many different businesses as they have adapted over the last 6 months, and she's going to be sharing the panel this morning. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Dan. Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to join you today. And the timing of this session really couldn't be better, as all businesses are looking towards the future to understand how we can get that right balance and approach to these new ways of working, how we can capitalise on the many benefits and the enforced digitisation that is enforced 2020, it's defined 2020, but blended with the established working practices and also the needs of businesses, employees and society. For our discussion this morning, I'm thrilled to be joined by a terrific panel of experts and business leaders. Dr. Brennan Jacoby, founder of Philosophy at Work, Charlotte Mair, founder and managing director of The Fitting Room, Simon Short, Executive Vice President, Global Customer Success of Salesforce, Matthew Kraust, General Manager, WeWork UK, Ireland and Emerging Markets, and Peter Cross, Customer Experience Director of John Lewis and Waitrose. In terms of the format, we're first going to hear from Brennan the insights of his latest report, Virtues of Virtual, followed by a discussion with Brennan, Charlotte, Simon, Matthew and Peter for about 30 minutes before Q&A from our audience. We're going to have 3 poll questions in the discussions, which we'll be asking live. A poll should appear on the right-hand side of your screen. It'll be live for about 15 to 20 seconds, and please do all participate. It's terrific to have your input in the discussion. So without further ado, over to you, Brennan, and see everybody again in about 10 minutes. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Charlotte, and thanks so much, Dan, for involving me in the conversation. What I'd like to do, everyone, is just take you through a couple things to set the scene before the conversation, and then I'll sort of move back into the panel as fast as possible so that we can get into a really great conversation. But the first thing just to highlight is that, over the last 6 months or so, we've been talking somewhat about the future, what's happening. There's been a real interesting experience with time. Is it moving quickly? Is it moving slowly? How do we navigate the future of work? And I think one thing has risen to the top, and that is that acceleration has been the name of the game. That everything that is happening now has been going in the direction of travel that it is, but the current situation we're in has just accelerated it. And so my background is in philosophy, and as Charlotte said, I run a business called Philosophy at Work, where we work with businesses on how they understand what's going on, how they think through it, and how they develop the sort of thinking skills throughout their people to really approach the challenges with curiosity, critical thinking, this sort of things. And so there's 2 things that I want to share that I hope will be really helpful as we get into the discussion. And they all come around what I see as one of the greatest, not only challenges facing every business around the world at the moment, but also one of the greatest opportunities. And that is, how do we work well together, whether or not we're together, when we're not together and when we are even together? And how do we navigate what might have looked like the future before, but is very much the present now? And I think that's especially true this September, as so many of us are navigating how much we come back together and how much we stay sort of physically dispersed, and how we define work and what that means. And so I think this is the greatest challenge, but also the greatest opportunity. And to help, just populate that landscape a little bit before the further group discussion and the Q&A that will follow, I want to share 2 things. The first is one way of framing what we're currently working through, living through. And the second is a set of values that I think can greatly help us move through it well, so that we don't just make it, but we actually progress and thrive, not only as businesses, but as individuals within those businesses. And the first thing that I want to say that is this framing is that I think it's right to understand the current challenge as a wicked problem. And when I say wicked problem, I don't mean something sort of dark and wrong in that sense. But a wicked problem, as you're probably aware, is characterized by high levels of uncertainty, high levels of complexity, and it is in contrast to pain problems and urgent problems, where pain problems are those that, so you need to hire someone, that's a pain problem. You can roll out a policy, a process. We've done it before, we can do it again. That's a tame problem. A critical problem is one where there's time sensitivity issues. So, I don't know, there's the fire alarm goes off, we all need to exit the building. There's a sense of urgency to that, but we know what to do. We just need a leader to say, everyone go in that direction, right? A wicked problem, in contrast, is one where there's high levels of uncertainty. It's probably never been dealt with before, and not just by us, but probably by anyone else. And it's incredibly complex. Now, there's an academic at the University of Oxford named Keesing, and he did some really interesting research around wicked problems, where he said that, in fact, if you're faced with a wicked problem, the last thing you want to do is lead with answers or even processes and policies. And the first thing we need to be doing when we have a wicked problem before us is be asking questions, because it's through those questions that we unpack the problem and turn it into a series of tame and critical ones as well. And so the first thing I want to suggest is that we approach the future of work as this type of challenge where there's a lot of complexity. And I think as we go through the rest of the conversation this morning, we'll be offering some answers, but we'll also be asking some questions, I think. And even as we start to think out loud together about some of those answers, it's a very sort of discussion-based form of curiosity about them, and I think that's appropriate. I think business will struggle if we go into the autumn and say we know exactly what to do and we're just doing this. Yes, we need to lead with boldness, but I think we need to retain our curiosity as well. So that's the first thing I wanted to put out on the table that I hope is helpful. The next thing is that at the start of the last sort of 6 months, everything was going on. Me and some colleagues at Philosophy at Work, and then also some sort of friends of the business around, people working in different industries, were noticing that a lot of the colleagues and clients that we were working with seemed to be responding to this type of challenge in two ways. They were either overreacting or seemingly underreacting. And it was really, really normal. It makes sense. You know, we're going through a pandemic. Of course, there's going to be these types of reactions. But we noticed that we were missing some opportunities to support our people. We're missing opportunities to respond well because we were in that very human way, overreacting and underreacting. And because my background is in philosophy, Aristotle came to mind. So Aristotle says that the right way to live, the right way to sort of thrive is by avoiding overreaction and underreaction, and instead trying to find a balance. And in fact, he calls that balanced state virtue. So for him, a virtue isn't some sort of moralistic concept. It's not a set of rules. It's just a way of being balanced in the storm. And so we put together this report with those colleagues and friends that I mentioned before, called The Virtues of Virtual. And far from being a sort of whistle-stop tour of, the good bits of virtual or something like that, what we set out to do was to say, how do we see businesses overreacting and underreacting in this time? And then what might it mean for us to have that balanced state? What are those virtues, that balanced ways of being in a very practical sense? So what are the sort of policies? What are ways that organizations can be that help us move through that? So what are the virtues of virtual? And how do we go through them? And so for the next sort of couple minutes, I just want to quickly take you through the 5 virtues that we identified in the hope that they'll be helpful to the discussion that we'll have in the next few minutes. So the first one is democracy. And when I say democracy, I don't mean sort of everyone voting on everything, but rather the spirit of democracy, the way in which we want businesses to not overreact by having execs sort of have a very top-down power, but rather say, we're going through an unprecedented time in the move to originally more dispersed ways of working, everyone working from home. Members of teams were probably using tech that they had used in their personal life and maybe not so much in the office. And now it was all merging. And one overreaction we saw was just a great growth in what sort of platforms were being sort of cobbled together. And so the overreaction is just absolute proliferation of tech. The underreaction was one of saying, we saw some execs trying to shut that down and saying, we're only going to be working in this way for good reason. But we saw also that was hurting some businesses. And so instead, in that middle space, the balance was democracy to say, go out to your people in your team, not necessarily en masse, but go out to people working most closely to you and say, what's working for you in your personal life? How are you, what tech would be best served here? In those early days when they're working out what tech is, I think now what that probably might look like is saying, what's going to work for people when we come back to the office? What's going to work for people in terms of not coming back to the office and have that dialogue? But one of the things I've got up on the screen is this statement that frictions among leaders and their teams, their tech, mean that the raw materials are being mined. And I think that's a really important, perhaps, piece to take into the conversation, that, in fact, when we're navigating all of this, there's going to be a lot of tension because we're going into new spaces. But rather than seeing that as conflict that we want to avoid, seeing it as something that is a sign that actually we're putting our finger on something that's really important. And if we can stay with it, continue being in dialogue with all the stakeholders, all the employees that are involved, we're going to come to a place, maybe sooner or later, but we're going to come to a place that's going to be progressive and helpful. The next virtue was accountability. And here again, it's about power. So some of the businesses we saw were overreacting in terms of having a very top-down approach to transparency and full transparency. And so, for example, for the report, I interviewed someone who, Bruce Daisley, who used to be VP at Twitter and in the UK and EMEA. And he said that he heard a story about one manager who was saying to their team, can you WhatsApp me before you take loo breaks even? And I mean, that's pretty extreme. But that's a very sort of strong-armed, top-down transparency approach that is trying to be completely transparent. And on the other end, there was a really interesting piece of research that was done at a Chinese phone factory, where they found that by putting up sort of hospital-style curtains, in fact, the workers were better able to innovate because they felt that they didn't have to just explain what they were doing so much to management. So when the curtains were down, they were actually moving more slowly because they were just sticking to the way that things had always been done. And they knew there was ways they could work faster, but they might have sort of been a little bit against policy and they didn't want to have to explain everything. But once they had put the curtains up and just allowed people to have a bit more trust and a bit less transparency, in fact, their effectiveness rose significantly. So, the takeaway here is to identify where strategic privacy is needed. The third and fourth virtues are clarity, and then in a moment I'll get onto collegiality, and they're all about relationships. So by clarity, we found that what's really important for businesses and teams to thrive is to say, be really clear about how you want to work, about your preferences for your people, about where what parts of the market are you going into, what's the plan, what are your aims? Because we know that when we're not clear about when we're available for doing collaborative work versus when we're doing deeper work, then we know that our days of work are just filled with interruptions. And as I've got there on the screen as well, there's been some interesting work around brainwaves and your ability to focus. And in fact, brainwave amplitudes are lowered when you're receiving smartphone notifications, even if you're not sort of dealing with them. It's taking us away. So that clarity around who's doing what, when are we available for being pinged and when not. Another thing that we found was that so often people in this time, especially when we're more dispersed, are wanting to bring each other into meetings because we sort of miss each other. We want to make sure that everyone feels included. And that can actually make the work suffer because we're involving someone maybe when they don't really have to be in that meeting. There's been a lot of talk about video call fatigue and Zoom fatigue. And that was in the early days because we were inviting everyone. We're saying, focus on collegiality, have good relationships outside of those meetings so that when it gets down to the work, we don't need to bring everyone in unless they really have to be there. The last one was understanding, and this is really about trust. It's harder to connect. So right now you can see me, I can't see you, and it's harder to really understand each other in some ways in this state. And so we're saying, when it's one thing when we're doing a session like this, it's another thing when we're trying to work together with our teams or really connect with our clients. And I think there we're talking about how do we get to know each other and be more authentic. And so that virtue of understanding that sits between extremes as well. I've moved through this quite quickly because I want to get out of the way so we can have a more robust discussion with the full panel and then Q&A as well. But one last thing I'll say is that anytime we're going through a wicked problem, going through a complex challenge like we are now, and anytime we need to cultivate democracy, understanding, accountability, these sorts of things, it takes a lot of courage. And so I think the one last point that I'd like to maybe leave hanging in the air is that I think as leaders in different businesses, in different industries, we need to sort of take heart, take courage with us, because anytime we need to lead with questions rather than quick answers or processes, that's going to take a lot of courage. But I think that's what we need right now as we work out how to really navigate the future now as well. So thanks so much for focusing on the last few minutes, and I'll enjoy the discussion as well. Charlotte, back over to you.
Thanks so much, Brennan, and that was a brilliant 10 minutes view of the highlights of the research and presentation. I urge everybody to read the report. It's absolutely terrific, incredibly thought-provoking and challenging. And certainly as I was reading through it last week, it really made me kind of question some of the perceived system that I thought was the best way of working. So now into our panel, we're going to have about 30 minutes or so. I'm pleased I can see everybody on the screen as well, and to get through. What I thought we'd try and do is break the conversation just into two parts. And this is certainly a conversation that could go on for a whole day and is worthy of a whole seminar in its own right. But firstly, I thought we'd talk about the future of work and innovation. And then secondly, Brennan, the elegant expression that you've just coined, how do we work well together when we're not together, which really captures the mood of the moment. How can we look at smart ways of working, leadership and culture? So firstly, into our first section, which I'll spend about kind of 10, 15 minutes on, innovation and the future of work. Simon, I wanted to come to you first. We had a terrific conversation last week before in prepping for the session today. Just briefly, thinking back to the kind of start of the crisis and over the last kind of few months, how did Salesforce adapt? And, where are you now in terms of kind of, what work looks like?
Thank you very much for this opportunity, and Brennan, fantastic introduction. Thank you. I think for us, there's really two big challenges. One is our own staff. Is like, how do you actually move to this new world? How do we make sure we look after people? No one knew at the beginning how long this was going to last for. I think a lot of people went into this, including me, thinking, okay, lockdown, 3 or 4 weeks, then back to the office, and then you kind of realize that actually this is going to go on for much, much longer. So there's kind of innovation around how you look after people, and I think we'll come back to that later on. But obviously my responsibility and my team is also to look after more than 170,000 customers worldwide who are all having different impacts depending upon what sector they're in. If you're in travel, retail, you've got a whole set of challenges. If you're in healthcare, financial services, you're in a whole set of other challenges of volume and capacity and how you react and how you deal. And I think we are kind of values of trust and customer success in the organization and innovation really drove us to say, how do we respond quickly? How do we listen to each and every customer and listen to what they do? And some of the examples of dealing with an airline who were in absolute chaos of cancelled flights, not knowing when they can get people back, not knowing what the future of their industry was, helping an airline move their entire call center to remote over 2 or 3 days so that everyone could operate from home, introducing bot technology to them within a very, very short period of time. Say, how do you handle all the basic questions as quickly as possible? Is my flight cancelled? Yes or no? You don't need to be taking that through a call center. You can actually be handling that through technology and getting things like that deployed for them within a very short period of time. Some very simple things like In the UK, when we went into lockdown, one of the things that the government said was one of the only things you can go out and do is go for a bike ride. One of our customers who sells bikes in the UK said what we actually want to do is let people hire one, let people borrow one and get hold of a bike. But we don't have any technology to support that. We were able to actually create something within 48 hours that went live on their website to say, here you go, here's the process using Salesforce. People can now book a bike, hire a bike, and return it and be able to do that. And then the kind of more complex end is we work with banks and financial services companies. They have the huge challenge of how do they distribute government money. In the UK, in America, in Japan, all over the world, governments were trying to support businesses and people through this process, but someone had to actually distribute the money, which is intensely complex. Because how do people apply? How do people actually get hold of that money as quickly as possible? And we've helped through our processes and our platform, many of those organizations deal with incredible volume, distributing literally billions of pounds and billions of dollars of money over very short periods of time. And then finally, the thing that we realized is that our platform has always helped our customers manage their customers. What we've never really had is a product that helps our customers manage their own workforce. So we built an entire product, top to bottom, called work.com over a 3-month period, pivoted our platform, which is all about how do you manage your workforce? How do you manage your office space? How do you manage whether people are ill, are not ill, are going on leave, are not going on leave, are coming into the office? How do you manage your office space? How do you manage a clean environment? And be able to manage your own teams in a very successful way. And again, that's been incredibly successful, helping industries across the world kind of just help, how do you actually manage your workforce in a whole new environment? So kind of our value of innovation really kind of comes to the fore of, so how do we actually listen to our customers deeply about what it is they're trying to do, what challenges do they have, and how do we help them pivot and respond to that as quickly as we can?
Thanks so much, Simon. A really terrific response to the question there. We can get into the detail of that kind of innovation. The work.com sounds amazing platform to be able to kind of help businesses really kind of navigate this new normal. Matthew, WeWork, obviously you've got your own teams, but of course, your clients rely on your offices for their place of work. How did you respond? Did you shut the WeWorks? But what did you do and how have you innovated for your clients?
Thanks, Charlotte, and thanks for having me this morning. I think being a global business with more than 100 buildings in China, we saw the pandemic developing extremely quickly. Yeah. What we took from there was a very swift movement in the UK, where we adapted our space. We invested millions in making sure that we could create safe environments while the pandemic was ongoing. So WeWork stayed open because we have members that use our space to serve the country and part of the essential workers, and we are glad that we have them in our space. But now I think what we're doing is we're trying to move to the next step, which is helping the members, companies that are using our space to have the discussion with their staff on what is the future of work, what is that new flexibility that we have all experienced. And now I think it's a question of putting this flexibility into action. And that means that how many days do you spend in the office? Do you come 1 to 5 days? Where do you work? Do you want to work closer to home, or do you work in an HQ? There's a lot of very fascinating questions, and we're trying to help our member companies to navigate that new flexibility.
And you must have terrific insight, actually, sitting there. You are really at the front line, seeing how businesses are thinking about, the traditional office space and how they want to use it, and then helping to inform and create the solutions for it. Absolutely. I wanted just to quickly use our first poll here now. The first question is, do you agree that now is the time for open innovation? So on the right hand of your screen, this should pop up. Please do use the click answer for that. It would be great to hear from you as the audience, to hear what you think about innovation. We've heard from Salesforce and WeWork about how they've quickly managed to innovate. I'm going to go on to the next question, and then I'll come back to the survey results. So do please all vote. A point you made there, Matthew, about the importance of kind of listening to your clients, but your teams. And Peter, this is where I wanted to come to you. John Lewis's and Waitrose is a business that is known for their employee interaction and their relationship with their employees, and the incredible strength of that. Thinking about this new future of work, how are you listening to and working with your employees to marry the needs of the business with their collective and individual needs?
Hi, Charlotte. Well, I mean, I think, to be honest with you, we were caught so much up in what became known, as you said, as the front line, selling food to the nation through our Waitrose supermarket. In those first few months, that you had no option but to work in an utterly immersive sort of a democratic way. I mean, we were actually sitting in our living rooms. I remember measuring 2 meters in my bedroom to work out the distance between the checkout and customers. And we had a partner in their bedroom working out how could we protect an hour for the vulnerable customers. And that spirit of innovation that you described came through pretty well every day. What could we do to help the NHS in our communities? Build these things we call sneeze screens. So that tirade of innovation and ideation that came from our people was utterly brilliant. And it is in our DNA. We're, as you say, a partner employee-owned business. But I think that the challenge now really is having gone through that really almost exhilarating, massively innovative period that came through the need that we had to get food onto Britain's table. Is what is this new normal really, and how we talk about flexibility. We're actually not very flexible at all really, because we're all, a lot of people are still at home, and the question that you're discussing is how do we move to a new way of working that is actually prepare ourselves for a future that is more smart and more flexible.
Definitely, and thank you. And I've just checked in on the results of the poll. Only 20% believe that the screen is a barrier to productivity, and 80% don't see the screen as being a barrier to productivity. So I think that really kind of, the audience absolutely agrees with this, idea that we need to be more flexible and kind of rethinking how do we adapt. Charlotte, I want to come to you. You're an incredible entrepreneur. You have an incredibly innovative and really exciting business. The Fitting Room is a creative agency. Working with hospitality and music clients, business must have come to a standstill, in April out of nowhere. How did you kind of manage the business? What did you do to be able to respond and kind of pull on all of your creativity and entrepreneurial talent to ride the storm?
So I actually had just landed back from New York, and I'd been out there for the Adweek Challenger Brand Summit, which was actually, ironically, all about direct-to-consumer and brand purpose. So I was pretty fired up on that kind of thinking, and then everything happened. I think I started the Fitting Room when I was 27. I had £17 in my bank account, and when retainers started going on hold and jobs started to be pulled, it was really just for me taking a moment and going, okay, 7 years ago, I had nothing. Am I scared to have nothing again? No. So what would I have done then? And how do I embody that now? And we really went back to basics. Even with the client briefs that came in, it was like, I know traditionally in the normal way, you guys would make us do it like this, but I kind of think we're in a new world now. Let's ride with that. So we were quite reactive. Like, one of our clients was launching a delivery at home service, and it was called Get Dirty at Home. So we put up billboards in South London talking about Boris banning people getting dirty at home around the time of mixing households. And we put up these billboards that said things like that, and you can have us in any room. And we went really kind of rogue, actually, with our marketing that kind of really hit the spot of predominantly millennials and Gen Zers. And I think as well, for us, people normally put us in the room when they want to create hype. My team is very young, so we respond to things. We're not a traditional structure. That was never in the business. And I think as well, this allowed us to almost strip back some of the ways that we had started working and go back to our original core of behaviours. And then the world did start to change for us, and we've actually come out of lockdown with a completely new client base based on the work that we did for clients to drive sales and volume throughout lockdown. So it was a bit of a weird shift for us.
That's terrific to hear. And when we were chatting last week, tell me about your plans for the office. This is brilliant. I love it.
So much to my accountant's dismay, I decided probably about 8 weeks into lockdown that we were going to close our office in Notting Hill, and actually we were going to save 50% of the money that we spend on our office just to appease everybody. But then the other 50% we were going to allow the team to spend. So from October, when we're out of our notice period, my team can essentially pitch to me to travel anywhere in the world, to see, to learn, to do whatever they want to do and work remotely from there. And this is, for us, again, when we went into lockdown, we rewrote our core brand values and we kind of dialed up how we were going to respond to it. And one of the things was being bold and putting ourselves out there that we've never really done. So this allowed us to do that. And for a team of young women, being able to say, oh, I'm going to New York to go to this, and I'm going to work from there and do my client calls from there, felt like the right vibe for who we wanted to be.
Totally, I think it's inspired, and you can see the level of creativity that's going to kind of drive the team forwards, and a really kind of clever way of adapting to the changing kind of landscape. And you've always, of course, got Matthew and WeWork when you do need office space, so you've got the solution right there. I think Peter, you touched on it there. It feels like we're in this kind of disparity between the realities of modern life, particularly now, and then the kind of traditional hours and place of work. The idea of the office being a set or a sole location, that work is 5 days a week, 9 to 5, just seems, largely kind of out of sync with modern life. Yet it's still the prevalent shape for the majority of places of work and way of working. How is that going to change now? What are we going to see? Maybe I might come to you, kind of Brennan and Charlotte there to pick up on that. What's this kind of new way of work actually going to look like?
Yeah, I think that's the big question. What's it going to look like?
Sorry, I know. In like 2 minutes, give us the answer for this.
I don't want to sound too much like a politician, but I do think that rather than commenting on what it will in fact look like, I think we can say something really important about how perhaps it ought to look like, what it ought to look like, and then we can say identify our destination and work out how to get there. But I think part of what I think it ought to look like is empowered for the people, and not just because we care about people, and of course we do, but because I think that's actually what leads to effectiveness. So it's not only good for well-being of people, it's not only good for creativity, it's good for the bottom line as well, because we know that when people take ownership over their lives and their work, we're more creative. We find better solutions. But I think one thing that I can say about what I think it will be like is I think we'll need leaders that are able to press pause in really strategic ways. And I hope that we can do this so that we have leaders, executives coming out and saying, what's going on right now? Let me keep checking in with this, because it's so easy to get wrapped up in the flow of everything. Everything's happening so quickly. But the other thing that I think we will see is a real change to how we understand physical space in terms of work. So it's been, in the old days, we would work together in many ways, a lot of businesses co-located, and then we would have away days, right? I think something that we'll start to see a lot more of is strategically placed people. So the office is a place to come together, to ideate, maybe to have together days, and then we go away to do the work. Unless, of course, we're in a role where, of course, we need to be physically proximate to do that. But I think it'll be a really interesting opportunity to discuss to see how we use this. I think that's going to be one of them. We'll see.
And thank you so much. And Charlotte, you work across numerous clients, some of the huge big drinks businesses. What are you seeing your kind of clients do and how they think about where, what this kind of new way is going to look like?
I think there's two things with this, actually, because I think if we look at it generationally, we've gone from baby boomers that stayed in their roles for their whole career and maybe had 2 roles. And then you look at Gen Z coming through now. This is the generation of side hustles. They're not going to traditional 9 to 5. GoDaddy did a survey maybe 3 weeks into lockdown, and it said that 20% of Brits were starting their own companies. I think it was something like 72 businesses were registered every day at Company House. And I think that balance, forgive me for saying it, if you take something like OnlyFans, the new home of entertainment that started as a platform for nude, that is now the home of people running their own cooking channels and everything else, the my team wanted them to be able to do their day job and then go off and do their side hustle, because their side hustle or that podcast or that whatever else they do normally drives influence into their day job. When they're going to talk to clients, they have a wider spectrum. So whilst I think that there's certain businesses that are set up with this normal structure, if you look at Gen Z, they're not looking for that structure in that same way. How the millennial try to find balance, Gen Z is going, hey, hell no, this is the way that I'm doing it, and that's how I'm going to do it. And that rise in self-employment, it's cool to be a CEO now. It's cool to be an entrepreneur now. You know, that's what Instagram is telling everybody. That's what you've got to do. And that is going to drive people wanting more part-time roles as well as flexibility. And we're just about to trial part-time roles, which we've never really done before. But to get that talent and that balance of talent who love what they do all the time, that felt like the right step for us.
And I think you've hit on a great point there. It's actually that generational point. And that's one of the, the challenges for businesses, kind of managing the needs, the desires and motivations of a more established kind of baby boomer workforce versus the next generation, and needing to attract that new talent, coming through. And Matthew, with WeWork, what are you seeing? How are you serving the needs of your client to quickly kind of respond to this kind of, new need for more flexible places of work?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting question. I think the workplace strategy in its own is going to be how I think we answer to the needs of our members, companies, and their employees. I think Charlotte made a great point, right? She started the discussion around the workplace, potentially working on the other side of the globe as really a culture element and as a way to keep our staff motivated. I think that's fascinating, and I think that's what a lot of companies out there should do. What it means concretely for WeWork is we are bringing flexibility, i.e. we give the ability to our members to take very short-term commitment, but we also give them the opportunity to have place all around the city. So if we take a city like London, we have around 60 locations scattered across the city. And we recently launched what we call City as a Campus, which gives the opportunity for a company and their employees to access any of these 60 locations. So I live in East London. That means I can just cycle around in 10 minutes I'm in the office, whilst my colleagues that live in South London can just pop in Waterloo. We see that as the future, really giving that ultimate flexibility to your employees, but keeping in mind that I think the office environment, because of the ability to see your colleagues or ability to work with a good Wi-Fi, with a good environment, I think is going to remain essential.
And actually, people need variety, right? One of the things that I know is just as an individual, I need an incredible amount of variety. And I find it seems quite kind of a bit soul-destroying being kind of stuck in the one place. So that variety is incredibly kind of, creatively inspiring. I wanted to quickly come to our next poll question here. So the question is, do you think companies will return to the office in full capacity? So that should appear on the right-hand side of your screen. Do quickly come in on that, because it's terrific to hear what the audience think. Peter, I wanted to come to you kind of here, thinking with John Lewis and Waitrose, how do you get the balance right? It's incredibly kind of challenging for leaders and managers to be able to read the needs and desires of your employees with marrying that with the needs of the business. So kind of how are you getting that right? And actually, who is making those decisions? Is that being led by management, HR? How much are you kind of, letting employees kind of be involved in those decisions?
I think Brennan said right at the beginning of the chat, this cannot be a sort of a top-down decision. Everyone has to feel they have a say in it. I think it's clear to me that there are certain things that are administrative tasks that are quite sort of bureaucratic tasks that are just better done, and tasks where you need thinking time. They're just better done on your own. But there are also more connected, more creative tasks that you have to some extent bring people together in a way that's very, very difficult, even with the technology. And when I think about this question, sort of the future of the workplace, it has to be a place, Charlotte, that I want to be, as opposed to all of my needs, be it my social needs, my well-being needs. My development needs have to be met by this place. But lastly, I've also got an interesting thought that it's odd that in a brand, the workplace has often been the last place that's reflected the brand. So you've had the sort of facilities team that goes from the furniture and the catering team that's on the food. Well, actually, marketeers have put a lot of energy into our customer-facing spaces, but actually very little energy into our internal facing spaces. And if a brand internal, it might have a better chance of sticking, you know?
Mm-hmm. I think that's a terrific point. I'm really kind of conscious of time, and I'm just going to quickly just check in on the survey results to see if we've had those in yet. We haven't yet, so I'm wondering if there might be an issue with the Q&A, but I'll come back to that in a second. I wanted just to talk about, kind of this role of leadership now. And I think, Brennan, you really kind of captured the mood of the moment with this kind of idea of how do we work well together when we're not together. And, this last kind of 6 months has got a huge challenge up for leaders and managers, not only in the ways of working, but also dealing with, the global trauma that the world is going through. In your view, what are the key leadership skills that are important now? I'm actually going to come to you, Simon, on that, just for the flow of the conversation. What do you think are the key skills for leaders now?
So personally, I think, to some extent, this is the same skill that we've always had to have, right? Which is listening, trust, empowerment, democratization. But I think it really gets magnified in this current environment. Because I think Brennan touched on so many things really well about there's no top-down answers. There's being authentic to you actually don't know what people actually want, what people actually need. We've had to do a lot of listening to our people. Our culture before this pandemic was very in-person. We have iconic offices that people love to come to, that are great places to be, free food, lots of events, entertainment, lots of public speakers coming in every day. People love to be in that environment and mix with people. And I think to some extent that's one of the reasons why people are attracted to join Salesforce, is the culture of that kind of team and that environment. And of course, you take it all away, you've got to reinvent. You've got to reinvent how you do that. And we've done a lot of things around, so we run at least 5 a week global series called Be Well Together. So we have public speakers, doctors, medics, we have monks with meditation, we have all sorts of things through that Be Well series that people can tap into. We have, certainly my team, we spent a lot of time on how do you still connect with people outside of work. So things like happy hour on a Friday, everyone can just come and have a drink together and socialize. Lots of team events. People trying to be creative. So an event recently where we sent everybody a list of ingredients. Go and buy these ingredients. And then when you join the meeting, we had a chef who helped us make an Indian meal, but all done together. So you kind of get to see inside everybody's kitchen, inside everybody's life, inside everybody's family. And actually, when you do this well, I've learned more about my team and their lives and their personalities and their environment than I ever learned before. It can create a whole range of new connections and new ways of being. But I think your point is incredibly valid, which is at the same time, I know many other people, find this incredibly tiring. The energy that you get from meeting people, connecting with people, the variety of meet the customer, go to a dinner, go to the office the next day, have a coffee with people. I don't think I certainly didn't realize that is energizing the whole time. Variety. Whereas now I sit here with webcam all day. I'm exhausted from doing nothing. And it took me a while to realize it. So we've also had to do a lot for our people about it's okay to take time off. It's okay to be away. We've given people a lot more flexibility to, have time off. We extended the concept of maternity, paternity to anyone with children at the moment, anyone with carer responsibilities at home. You can have more paid holiday. You can have more time off. If your environment is so challenging that actually work is actually just difficult and stressful, take time away and still be paid, still go through that environment. But we've had to do it all by listening. We don't have the answer. And we're still inventing. Every week we're trying to think of new ways of connecting with people and new ways of trying to make this environment as energizing and as stress-free as possible.
So exactly, and just acknowledging that kind of 360 kind of pressures of the kind of new way of working for all the benefits. It can be remarkably challenging and can be stressful in its own way. Peter, how are you at John Lewis and Waitrose? How are you kind of supporting your leaders and managers to find these kind of new ways of working and managing and leading? How are you training and developing your teams?
Is my camera on? I'm hoping it's on. It may not be on, but if it's not on, apologies. I think we're all working our way through this, in honesty, Charlotte. We've also done an enormous focus on well-being across our business, and have really tried to sort of bring that into the conversation. I think it's actually very difficult to work out how people are feeling at all levels of the organisation if you haven't got that physical connection. And inevitably, there's probably a lot of people putting a brave face on.
Yes.
Whereas in truth, they might be coming off feeling absolutely exhausted. And putting a brave face on 10, 12 Zoom calls all day is exhausting. So I think I think as we just discussed by Simon, having that real focus on everyone's mental health at this time is critical. And that applies to all levels of the organisation.
Mm-hmm. Terrific, thank you. I'm going to move through to our kind of audience Q&As. We have lots of brilliant questions come in, so I want to make sure we try and get through as many of those as possible. The results from the survey about will we return to the kind of the office as we used to, the resounding 98% have come back saying no, it's going to be flexible working from here on in. So some of the questions, let me just quickly swap to the live chat and pull some of those up. Are the panel seeing any truly visionary approaches to not just reacting to the immediate challenges that are forced upon us, but putting their lives, business on a trajectory for what might be a totally new economy, value reset, social scene? Matthew, would you like to take that, with the view that you've got your own business, but actually the businesses that you work across? Any truly visionary approaches to how businesses are reacting?
I don't know if it's going to be truly visionary, but I think for me there's a few elements. I think the first one was it gave me that pandemic gave me a lot of insight on how to engage with our staff, and I think the focus on mental health that we just mentioned was something that we really put front and center during that period. And I think that's something, it's maybe not visionary, but I think it's a necessary thing to do now, I think, going forward. I think if we go back to I think what's going to change when we talk about flexible working is being extremely clear that the flexible working has many different versions of it. That's where you're going to work. So working from home, but also working closer to your house. The hours that you work, we are looking at what we call core hours. At what time do you start every day? Do you start at 8 a.m.? But 8 a.m. might not work for some of the parents out there. Do you start at 9? Really looking at this very large amount of question. So I think, that's what I think about it.
Yeah, and the businesses that succeed are going to be the ones that are going to be able to be agile, that can listen to their employees, understand the mood of the moment. It's a huge challenge. Another question what alternatives do you have in your company to the elevator, water cooler, coffee machine? I think it's a great question. There is so much social cohesion, congeniality that happens in those kind of offline conversations, those quick, social check-ins that really can help to bond and build that team kind of camaraderie and spirit. Charlotte, what do you see happening there? And also, I'd love to kind of hear from you, Peter, as well, about how do you kind of create that with the big workforce?
I think we've been looking very much at where we talk about these relationships and forwards. Our focus has been between, say, our clients and their guests or their customers. So we take some of the really pivotal things that have happened during lockdown. I don't know if you guys are familiar, but there was a piece called Versus TV that launched in the US. That we have this rule around millennials love to remember. And Versus TV is basically a throwback to the noughties and 90s of songstress and songwriters. And they've been having these kind of virtual battles, essentially, over musicians. And last weekend, they had a massive one with Brandy and Monica, and they actually outstreamed the VMAs. If you then take some of the more, I think if you look at things that are happening culturally in terms of collaborations, different brands having conversations, that's where we're heading. I think this kind of, you're in this company, so you do it like this. You're in this company, so you're a competitor, has completely changed. We teamed up with an agency and did a 3-day virtual classroom, and we brought together a group of absolutely badass women from the UK and the US to talk about changes in entrepreneurship, startups. We had the PR director from Adidas. We were talking about this brand innovation, and actually, again, from the younger generation, this sort of human experience piece didn't seem to be a problem because they're used to FaceTiming their friends. Their location is on their Snapchat. Their days are completely different to a baby boomer. And that's kind of the shift. I think it's less of a worry for the younger ones. They want to see purpose. They want to have conversations, but they want everything on their phones. They want everything to go. They want to be cool. They want to be relevant. It's a completely different mindset. They're running whole businesses off of our Instagram. It's a movement. They don't need that depth. That they'll hop around. So for us, and within my team all in our 20s, that's so much less of a challenge. But for our clients with sort of older exec, that's a real challenge for them to understand that mindset of actually the young ones are looking for that interaction in that way because they don't feel that they need it.
Yeah, that's a terrific question, and it ties into so many kind of aspects around. That younger generation don't need it, but if they are in a big corporate, how actually do you get the visibility to ensure that you're considered for promotions? Another question that's just come in as our final question is, do you think we're going to move towards greater flexibility and a 4-day working week? I'd love to hear from you all. I've certainly read a lot of research that kind of points towards the very real benefits of the 4-day working week, but it's a huge kind of seismic shift for a lot of businesses. Perhaps to kind of Simon and Peter first, as kind of the larger kind of scale businesses.
I think without doubt, right, this leads to a lot more flexibility. It shows that people can work in different ways. People can have a lot more empowerment, trust. You can democratize ways of working, so people can do what they need to do to get the job done. And I don't think businesses will return to kind of more traditional, strict 9 to 5, be in the office, because people won't want to work there. People will want that flexibility, but at the same time with office space. One of the things that we've done is we've encouraged every team to do a meeting-free day. So I have meeting-free Fridays. Now that, and again, trust of people does that mean people are working, not working? Doesn't matter, right? You're still getting the job done. But it actually says, don't spread your meetings out all week and have everybody in front of the screen. Different to a 4-day week, but it's still about flexibility, and it's still about different working patterns, time away. It's okay to disconnect. It's okay to do other things. And that's actually been really successful. People have really appreciated that kind of concept of, you don't fill your 5 days. Let's try and just keep the screen time for 4 days. And I think some of these things will pervade when we get back into some level of, meeting and normality. Is how do you hold these flexible working practices and patterns for the future?
Yes, totally. I'm really conscious of time, so and I'm going to just quickly wrap up. Sorry, Peter, I didn't manage to come to you. It's been terrific to speak to you all. Seriously, I wish I could just spend another kind of hour talking, because it's so fascinating. And I think, all of us have this incredible opportunity to define what the future of working life, looks like, and how innovation and how collaboration is going to be part of that. I suspect we're going to look back on 2020 and see it as the time that the rule book just got torn up, and that actually we as individual businesses and society can think about how we can create a smarter way of working, more inclusive and more productive way of working in the future. I'm going to hand back to Dan. It's been terrific to be with you all this morning. A huge thank you to the brilliant panel, and a big thank you to American Express for hosting the conversation. It's a really important live debate at the moment. Over to you, Dan.
Thanks, Charlotte. I'd echo your thoughts. A really exciting, interesting and informative debate. I read that Steve Jobs, who I think is a tech, or everyone would say is a tech visionary, when he designed Cupertino, the head offices, he designed it because he realized that actually the best innovations took place based on informal interactions or random interactions that took place in the offices. And I think, that was like 10 plus years ago now. And I think, the thing that I've seen and I've learned over this time is people trying to substitute and recreate new ways of connecting using technology whilst they're not there physically in person together in an office. So yeah, yes, I'm a strict believer that you need to be physically there to collaborate. But I think there's lots of new ways I've seen people collaborate just as well in this new world. So fascinating debate. I'll sort of share that insight. Thank you very much, Charlotte, and to the panel. The final thanks to all of you for joining, and to all of our we've got some of our closest and biggest partners and merchants on the conference today. So thank you all for joining. And our customer satisfaction survey is going out in the next few days. So the one thing I would ask is that our partners and merchants, when you receive that, please give us your feedback. I promise that we read it, we respond to it, we action it. It drives what we focus on and we prioritize as an organisation. So we take it very seriously. So please, when you get that survey, if you could take a couple of minutes to answer it, it doesn't take very long. I'd much appreciate it. So thank you very much. I hope to see you again soon. We'll definitely run another panel like this in the early part of next year. I suspect that will be another live workers in person, but I wish you the best, and thank you so much for joining, and I'll see you all soon. Take care, everyone.